news recently broke that black actress, Lashana Lynch, made headlines by being casted in a future 007 film. So in this film, she is poised to be the next 007, the next James Bond, if you will. A lot of people were split on this, if you will. It was a very polarizing decision that was met with mixed reactions all across the board. So a lot of people were saying, hooray, hooray, celebrate diversity, women empowerment. Other people were saying, what the hell, like, this doesn't make any sense. So it got me thinking about not only this scenario, but the scenario with The Little Mermaid and what have you, and this whole thing about diversity and what have you. So let's talk about that. Let us have a discussion on that. In regards to Lashana Lynch playing the role of 007, I would say, me personally, I'm indifferent to it. I don't really feel one way about it. It's cool that we have yet another, black individual playing a prominent role, and a female as well, especially. So I think that's a good look. And I can understand why James Bond purists feel a certain way, because James Bond has a certain image and what have you. On top of that, he's a male and all that stuff. When it comes to James Bond or 007 in general, 007 essentially is a code name. It's a code name. So you don't have to have a particular image or look a certain way to have a code name. And I get it from the original novels that were written in the 60s and so on that have been adapted. James Bond was always carried on with the image of a white British male, dark hair and what have you. And most of the actors have portrayed that. Pierce Brosnan, Roger Moore, Sean Connery, but he kind of had reddish hair in those films. Either way, you've had those guys portray those roles. I think the only person who kind of deviated away from that image was Daniel Craig, and I remember even Daniel Craig got some flack for having blonde hair and blue eyes because that wasn't the natural appearance of James Bond. And even when people were in their discussion holes about whether or not Idris Elba should be casted for the role of James Bond 007, people were kind of mixed. They kind of had the same reaction that people are having right now. And so now, fast forward, we have Lashana Lynch who's now playing that role. Again, I feel very indifferent to it because at the same time, it's just a code name. Like, no one specific person can be James Bond. I get it. The image has been there for the last 50 years, literally, and that's something that's very hard to rewrite in the minds of many people who have grown up with this franchise and have grown with it. But in reality, that's exactly what it is. It's a code name. It can be given to literally anyone. So I get why people are upset because they've had that image for so long. But sometimes things need to change. They need some retinkering. That could be one of them. Either way, I feel indifferent to it. Now, I can understand rather why people would be mad at it, besides from the fact that you're remixing an original character whose grounds have been put in place for the last 50 years or so. I think there are some people who are mad at, black people especially, who are mad at the fact that there is a black woman playing this role because it's not an original role. I think there is a segment of black people who would rather prefer that if there is a role that requires a lead male or female, that it's an original story rather than a story that's been around for decades upon decades and then just inserting that black person in that role as the black version of. And I understand why, because it does bring some sort of expectation to it. So you're expected to at least play the role to the same level as past actors who have done so, and either that or you have to live up to it, or you have to exceed those expectations. And if you don't, then not only is the movie going to be trash in their eyes, but they're going to say, well, see, look at it. They only put her in this role because she's a black woman and diversity is a thing. So I get that there's that angle of it as well. I think it just depends on how you view representation and diversity within Hollywood. Now, is Hollywood trying to cash in on diversity? Of course they are. Hollywood doesn't do anything without the sake of raking in money. So let's just take that cat out of the bag. Surprise, surprise. I think it's just a matter of how well you do it and how well you perform it. Because there are some cases of diversity within Hollywood within recent years that have not only made bank, but they've also reached critical acclaim and praise. But there have been other times where it just kind of looks like a money grab. So Let me break down a couple of them, and let me see. I want to see what you guys think about that. By the way, hit me up on social media platforms at CoolRadiosDC to share your thoughts on that. Let's talk about a few films, for example, that came out in recent years: Ghostbusters, Ocean's 11, and Captain Marvel. All right. So with Ocean's 11 and Ghostbusters, those were remakes. So the original Ghostbusters from 1984, I believe, that was a classic film. That's not only a classic 80s film, but a classic film overall. So people have their attachments and their emotions, attached to it in a sense. So they're gonna feel a way that it's not done to justice. They would rather have the original cast back and do a sequel if that were the case, rather than get four other actors to do it. Not to mention, a lot of people would say that diversity is being shoved down the throats because they're taking old films and then remaking them, but putting people who are completely different in it. So in this scenario, you have 3 Caucasian women and 1 black woman, whereas in the original film from '84 was 3 white guys and 1 black guy. So right there and then, people are looking at it and saying, "Oh, it's just a knockoff from the '84 film," but the only difference is that it's women this time. Now, I didn't see the movie, so I'm not going to judge on whether it's a good or bad movie. I can only go based off of what the reviews were for the movie, and the reviews weren't that great, and the return on investment wasn't that great either. So I think that works against people who are considered to be a part of diverse communities, because of the fact that you already have to live up to this mantle that's been placed upon, that is on the highest of pedestals. And if you don't meet that level, then you're already riding up Schitt's Creek. So you're already working from the ground up in that sense. You already have a lot working against you, because people already have the preconceived notions that it's already going to be bad. And the same thing happened with Ocean's 11, the remake that they did not too long ago. And I get it. You want to have like a female empowerment type of film, and I'm down with that. But again, you are taking an original property and you are trying to remix it for a crowd that is already attached to the previous Ocean's 11s from I think the 70s, and then you had the remake in the early 2000s, and then the one that you currently put out I think last year or 2 years ago. So again, you're kind of playing with people's nostalgia at that point, and they want to see things the way they saw it when it came out in this particular time period, not when it's remixed and you're only doing it just for the sake of diversity. Again, that'll probably be another scenario where they would much rather have the original cast come back for one last hurrah rather than just remix it and just add in women or visible minorities just because it's diversity. So I think that's where some people are coming from. Mind you, there are some sexist assholes out there who just don't want to see women win at all, and they're just assholes. But there are people who, when they look at diversity, they say, okay, this is just a money grab. You're just taking a film that already exists, but then you're remixing it just for the sake of diversity so you can make some extra cash. And where you're taking an older property that's already been done to death, I can see it from that standpoint. I can understand that. And in that scenario, I would much rather that they make an original movie for those women so that they can stand out on their own, so that they're not being compared to past films. That's what I would prefer at the very least. Now, again, I didn't see that movie, didn't know how it did in the box office. But again, like Ghostbusters, it didn't have the greatest of reviews. So again, that worked against them. Now, when it comes to Captain Marvel, that one's a little interesting because there's never been a Captain Marvel film before. And Captain Marvel is an adaptation of a comic book. Now, the thing with Captain Marvel, it didn't suffer the same fates as the previous movies that I just mentioned in terms of remixing an old project and just doing it but putting the female version in it, or whatever the case may be. This one suffered, well, I don't want to say suffered because it made bank at the box office, but the reviews were very mixed, and I saw the movie myself, so that's one I can definitely comment on in that regard. The movie suffered, okay, let me stop saying suffered, that's not the wrong word to use. The movie was polarizing, that's a better term. The movie was polarizing because of the fact that, yes, you have diversity in there, but they try to force it down people's throats in the sense where they were a little too on the nose about it. Like, see what we did there? See? Yeah, diversity. So, for example, there are parts of the movie where Carol Danvers, who is Captain Marvel, was being catcalled. And there's one particular scene in the movie where some guy on a motorbike was like, hey, honey, why don't you smile more? And it's like, okay, we get what you're trying to do. All right, lead female in the movie. Her whole thing is she's been told that she couldn't do this, that, and the third, and they're constantly putting in the narrative of like the men around her putting her down because of the fact that she's a woman. I get that, but I think they hammered that point in one too many times, and it got to a point where it's like, okay, guys, we get it, we understand. She's a woman in a male-dominated industry and society in general, and she's trying to fight from the ground up because some sexist assholes won't take her seriously. We get it. You don't have to keep on ramming it in our throats and that. So I get it from that standpoint. On top of that, in a pivotal fight that happened in the third arc of the movie, you have the song "I'm Just a Girl" by Gwen Stefani playing in the background. A critical fight, a critical dramatic moment, and you have that song in the background. I'm just like, okay, guys, we understand what you're doing. Like, we've been understanding. Like, you don't, like, this, we're not children. This isn't a pop-up book. We understand. You don't have to keep on driving that narrative home. So I think people who saw the movie were noticed that, and they're just like, yeah, guys, chill. Just chill for a minute, please. Now, there are some people in the comic book community who are a bit more particular on that film, not just because of that, but because of the fact that the original Captain Marvel from the 70s, the one that debuted in the comics, was a black woman. And in fact, not only was a black woman, but it was a character known as Monica Rambeau. And in the Captain Marvel movie, Monica Rambeau was a little girl who was the daughter of Carol's friend Maria Rambeau, who ironically was played by Lashana Lynch. Now, a lot of people were mad at that because it's the fact that she is supposed to be the Captain Marvel. So, and a lot of people see that in the sense where that could have been Marvel's opportunity to have yet another black lead in that role, especially a female. So you'd be killing two birds with one stone. Not only are you representing for the black community, but you're representing for the female community as well. You're just comparing the two in one, and you would be comic book accurate. Now, some people may argue that this version of Carol Danvers has been the most popular one thus far, and that's why they used her for that. But it depends on who you're asking. So those are a few prime examples of diversity not necessarily working in the favor of Hollywood. Now, let's get to some examples of it when it has worked in the past. So you have movies like Black Panther, Wonder Woman, Fast and Furious, Crazy Rich Asians, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, to name a few. Now, let's go to Black Panther. And I know I talked to death about this movie all last year, or most of last year, I should say. But that movie worked because it was, again, another comic book adaptation based on an original character. This character was originally black. He was originally African. He was originally from a nation called Wakanda, etc., etc. We know the whole story. And when they adapted it into a film, they kind of made it their own thing and had some modernized tendencies and sensibilities injected into the movie that resonated with audiences of today, as well as audiences of, I don't want to say of old, but like of past generations. Like, that's the type of movie that you can watch with your parents and have an in-depth discussion about ideologies and isolationism and nationalism and the African diaspora, et cetera, et cetera. And on top of that, there was great acting along the way, and there was moments of female empowerment. I mean, half that movie was basically female empowerment, and they did it without trying to hit you in the hammer with it. Like, you had a general, you had a scientist, you had a maverick, and you had a monarch. And those are all four completely different characters who had very little similarities or more differences between them. And they didn't have to hammer that in. Like, we just saw it. They led by example. They didn't say, I'm a woman and I'm a scientist. They didn't have to do that. And Black Panther didn't have to be like, I'm a black man and I'm a king. They didn't have to do that. We saw it by example. They just did their thing. It's like Kawhi Leonard on the court. He doesn't have to prove that he's a leader by saying it. He leads by example. And that's what Black Panther did, for example. And then you have Wonder Woman, kind of going into my point about just leading by example. Wonder Woman starred Gal Gadot as the titular character. And again, she proved that she has female empowerment coursing through her veins by the actions that took place in that film, which is why it made bank and which is why it was critically acclaimed. Then you have Fast and Furious, which has been diverse from the moment it jumped in theaters back in 2001. And they've always made it a point to involve a diverse group of actors in that film. You've had black actors in that film. You have white actors, Latino. You've had Asian actors. Like, I mean, it's like watching the United Nations revving it up in Mitsubishi cars. Like, that's basically what it is. So there's no arguments over there. And then you have Crazy Rich Asians, which is really big for the Asian community because it was one of the very few films that we've seen in Hollywood where the majority of the cast is Asian, and it doesn't have to do with martial arts, and it doesn't have to do with a woman being docile towards the white man, and it didn't have anything to do with an Asian male being nerdy or pubescent or being emasculated or whatever the case may be. They're rich, prominent Asians within the Asian community in California, I believe, and it was basically a romantic comedy, but with Asians. That's all it was. Mind you, I didn't see the film, but the premise of the film, it's basically a romantic comedy that focuses on the affluence within the Asian community in that particular area of California, I believe. So don't quote me on that, but correct me if I'm wrong. Those aren't movies that Asians would normally be casted in North America. Maybe films in the Asian market might do that, but definitely not in North America. So that was a hallmark moment in that sense. And then you have a film like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which, again, a diverse cast. Yes, it's like the umpteenth Spider-Man movie, but it's arguably the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been made. Not just because of the diversity, but because of the humor in it, the writing, the dialogue, the animation, the type of animation that they used, and the fact that they showed a different side of New York that they haven't really shown in past Spider-Man movies. Like, instead of showing a gentrified area in Queens, they showed a brownstone area of Brooklyn where you saw black people, where you saw Latinos, where you saw different ethnicities combined into one. And then all the other spider people that were in that film were black, were Latino, were Asian, were white, were female. You saw all of that. So there are times where diversity does in fact work. But it all depends on how it's done. And that's the main thing that I'm trying to get at. So if you're trying to remix an old film from like the 70s or a film that's already been done and you just do another version of it, but this time you say, okay, let's swap out all these white male actors for female actors or for black actors, then it just becomes the black version of. And I think that's what a lot of people within the black community are upset about, and I get it. And I think what Hollywood needs to do, and Hollywood has been getting pretty lazy for Lord knows how long, is that they got to create original roles or allow people to create original concepts and have rules for original characters, so that way it can become its own new thing. And I get it, comic book adaptations and novel adaptations have been a thing, especially for this past decade. But let's not reach for the lowest hanging fruit. Like, I saw a trailer for a new Charlie's Angels film, and I'm just like, you already did that back in the 2000s. Like, why are we doing this again? You know what I mean? So that's another example of Hollywood just reaching for the low-hanging fruit when it comes to diversity. Like, you're being lazy with it. Now, in regards to, the whole Ariel Little Mermaid thing, I kind of already explained my point on this, but I would say when it comes to Little Mermaid, it's a mermaid. You know what I mean? And I get it. Ariel has this classic image of a mermaid that appears to look like a Caucasian female with red hair and what have you. If anything, the red hair is more synonymous with the Little Mermaid than her appearing to be Caucasian, because at the end of the day, she is, in fact, a mermaid. Mermaids have no race that's related to the human species. They're their own species. So if that's the case, why does she have to be a white woman? Like, that's one of the few cases where you take an original character like that, but then you can remix it, because you can literally remix that into anything you want. Similar with the whole 007 thing that I mentioned. It's a code name. So it can go to any agent who is currently presiding under that code name. Same thing with Little Mermaid. It's a mermaid. Mermaids have no race. And there's no distinction as to where she comes from. Therefore, because she's linked to that, she must be of descent of whatever country. No, it's a freaking mermaid. So if they got Halle Bailey to play that character, cool. If they had Zendaya to play that character, cool. If they had Ariana Grande to play that character, cool. It doesn't matter. I think the main thing that matters for that role in particular is whether or not the actress can sing. And Haley can sing, from what I've heard. She's very good at singing. I think the main thing that they need to do is maintain the red hair. She needs to have the red hair. If they don't have the red hair, then that's going to be yet another thing that people are going to flame her over, and she doesn't deserve that. So they got to do right by her in that regard. And my thing is this, this isn't the first time where you've had a role like The Little Mermaid where the race wasn't really that important. I mean, you look at the role of Arthur Curry, a.k.a. Aquaman. It was played by why am I forgetting this guy's name right now? Holy crap. The big Samoan dude. It'll come to me in a minute. I don't know why I just blanked out right there and then. Basically, that guy is Samoan. And Arthur Curry, the character, he looks like a white guy. A white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. That man does not look like a white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. He is Samoan. So people weren't freaking out about that. But okay, whatever. Screw that. We'll leave that alone. And then you had Samuel L. Jackson play the role of Nick Fury. And for the majority of the time, Nick Fury as a character has been a white guy in the comics. It wasn't until maybe the early to mid-2000s at the latest that they remixed the character of Nick Fury and made him a black man. And not only made him a black man, but they made him into the image of Samuel L. Jackson, basically, which is how he was able to land that role in the MCU. But again, people weren't freaking out about that. The character of Heimdall, that's played by Idris Elba in the Thor franchise. Again, a character that was a white guy for the most part from what I've seen, and then they remixed him into a black guy. Now, he did get flack for that, which I thought that was stupid, but he should have gotten flack for that. Like, you're talking about a fictional land that doesn't even exist, right? It's not even on Earth. It's a dimension above Earth, or whatever the case may be. It looks like flat Earth. If Earth was flat, it would be Asgard. That's exactly what it is. Asgard is flat Earth. So Kyrie Irving is not completely wrong per se on the Earth being flat if he's talking about Asgard. Anyways, either way, I think it all matters on what role is being casted and how that role is going to be portrayed. Again, if you're casting roles that are based on like mythical people and mythical creatures and what have you, race goes out the window in my personal opinion. But if it's based on someone that already does exist, that's where it gets money. I think that's where people have their issues with it. Let me just say that. They have their issues with it. Now, again, like I said before, some of their issues reside in their hatred towards people of different ethnic groups. And for those people, they're omitted from this conversation because they're assholes and douchebags. But when it comes to people who are talking about the image of said person and what have you, and how it doesn't align with the consistent image that's been portrayed for a long time, then that's where waters get a bit muddied, and that's where you have that divide. So either way, when it comes to Hollywood, again, like I said before, if you really want to be authentic, if you want to be creative and groundbreaking, either create new roles altogether and portray those stories so that we can have more original concepts, or if you are going to take an original story and adapt it into film, then make sure the casting is proper in terms of the actor, the caliber of the actor, and how the story is going to be recreated and retold and reimagined. That's the main thing that comes with it. But either way, where do you guys align on this? Are you for diversity? Are you against diversity? Are you for diversity if it's actually benefiting the consumer as well as the actors and everyone in between? Let me know what your thoughts are. Hit me up on social media @CoolRadioCC and let me know.